Hey, everyone, and welcome back to Brothers of the Arcana. As always, I am Alex Aldea.
I am Dave Ferrigno.
And with us today, we have...
Erik Ireland.
Erik Ireland. And Erik Ireland is an incredible fellow, beard aside, even though that is an amazing feature, all in all, I would say. I've been a fan of his work, of his podcasts, of basically everything he does, stemming from a guy I pay a lot of attention to named Angelo DeLullo. I read his book, got involved in some of the ideas behind persistent non-duality, and soon afterwards came in contact with a lot of Erik's work, and was blown over by your honesty, your integrity, the way you approach life and its mysteries, let's call it. It's just an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Likewise. Thank you. It's fun to be here. Excuse me. I was looking into, when you invited me on the show, I was still looking into what you guys talk about. It was really interesting. I didn't know much about it. So I'm sort of looking forward to learning a lot from you guys today too. And you are, you're involved in the Freemasons, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, both Dave and I are Freemasons. We're both past masters of our respective lodges. That just means you're president of a lodge of guys. The larger parts of which are the entire fraternity. Freemasonry works a little differently in America than it does in other places. And Dave, you can stop me when I've spoken too much because I usually end up carrying on about this. But
my only real exposure to it is the English version through that reality show that they had about that.
They was the Grand Lodge of England, and that's a little bit different than what we're doing, but similarities obviously.
So I'm curious about it, but of course you may have touched on it lots in other podcasts and all that. We certainly don't need to talk about it here, but I am very curious about it because it's been sort of adjacent to a lot of things in my life for most of my life, but I don't really know much about it.
Yeah, happy to talk about it here. Happy to talk about it offline as well. When you look at it for what it is, it's a fraternity. It's a fraternity of men to make men better men. I'm writing a book that sort of is tangential to that. It's the idea of making men better men through the use of sacred space. And I know you know a lot about that, and sort of the different ways to sort of actuate that. This comes through, in Masonry, it's called seeking further light. And that could mean a lot of things. That could mean for a lot of guys, come to it for different purposes. One, friendship. As you get older, it's harder to make friends, in certain respects outside of maybe your job or your immediate circle. So this allows that in a pretty ecumenical environment, doesn't discriminate on creed or sex. Well, it does discriminate on sex because it's only for guys, but, it's outside of being a true fraternity, so to speak, and being very old. So there's certain things but in terms of religion, any religion, as long as you believe in a higher power, and even that is different in other parts of the world where atheists can join. But in America and most of Europe, you have to believe in some kind of a higher power because you take certain oaths at the altar when you become initiated. And those oaths are not to impugn you or your character or anything like that. They're meant to keep the secrets for the brethren because that's what's important. Every secret of Freemasonry is out there on the websites already. So it's not like we're really keeping it. What it is you go through something and it's a Gestalt experience, right? You're familiar with the idea of you go through something that you can't put into words, possibly like persistent non-duality. And when that happens, that's a special thing, right, that you've gone through. And that special thing you share with other guys who've gone through the same special thing. And that's really why the secrets are kept. They're there because it's now something for us. It's our thing. It's something that we've all gone through. It's really cool. It doesn't impugn your integrity, or it's not there to make fun of you like a lot of fraternities that are there to demean you and things like that. Even though most fraternities are Masonically derived, Masonry being the first fraternity of its kind. So it's very interesting that way. It's meant a lot to me personally. I know it's meant a lot to Dave over our time, because sometimes there was a time I didn't have much going on at all in terms of job or anything else, and you go to a lodge. You can get a meal. They're happy to see you. You can BS a little bit with your friends and stuff like that. Makes you feel better. It gives you a different perspective when you might need it. So
community,
very much so. It's an absolute feeling of community. Is it a cult? Yeah, probably. Am I bothered by that? Not really. But I'm in a lot of cults. I'm in TM. I mean, like, there's just don't
you have to have like big charismatic leader for a cult though? Do you guys have one big charismatic leader?
Well, we replace him every year with a different charismatic leader, and I in an actual democratic election. So I guess I don't know.
I'm sorry, I don't think you get to be a cult.
All right, well fair enough.
No, we're definitely not a cult.
Man.
To that point, we have.
I thought it was us,
but the secrets kind of help.
All right, no worries.
The secrets do help. I do remember back in the early '90s, I had a roommate who had somehow or another had come across this big stack of turquoise covered booklets that had kind of all the Masonic stuff in them.
Yeah.
And at one point I thought, I wonder if the secrets are in here. I started reading these and never got very far in all that. But that was about all I knew about those secrets.
Yeah. There's really only two secrets that we don't talk about publicly. One of which was a historical safety feature. So how one Mason recognizes another. And there's a way that's done. And it would be because even during World War II, guys would wear forget-me-nots, which were flowers that would signify you as a Mason. That was at that time. But there's other modes of recognition. We call them handshakes and other things like that. We don't talk about that because back in the day, Masons went to the concentration camps, much along with Jews and homosexuals and communists and everybody else that wasn't in Hitler's ken, so to speak. So that was, Masons don't do well in dictatorial societies because they are by nature ecumenical, by nature open-minded, by nature a product of the Age of Enlightenment. And so you should be able to speak about whatever you want outside of religion and politics. You don't do that in the lodge room because that does lead to division and things like that. But I'll tell you the two quick stories that kind of express. There's a guy who's an encyclopedia salesman, right? So he's going all over the highways and byways of the United States, and he's there to sell encyclopedias. And his car breaks down in Kansas somewhere, and he trudges all the way to the mechanic shop. The mechanic, he sees a square and compass right over there above the mechanic shop, denoting that he's a Mason. At least as far as that goes, that's a pretty popular one to understand. He goes in there and pretends to be a Mason. Right. And he goes, "Hey, brother, how are you?" He wasn't a Mason at that time. And he says, "Hey, brother, how are you? Listen, my car's back there." So the guy gets in the truck, brings the car over, fixes the car, lets the guy sleep at his house overnight, feeds him and everything else, and the guy's on his way. Well, years later, the encyclopedia salesman's older. Since then, he's become a Mason. So he's done that. He's become master of his lodge and all kinds of other stuff. He rolls through that same little town again many, many years later, sees the mechanic shop and remembers it. So he goes in there and he sees the guy. He's still there working on the car, much older, of course. And he says, "Hey there, I wonder if you remember me." He takes a look at him and goes, "Yep, I remember you." He goes, "Listen, I rolled through here many years ago and I called your brother, I asked you to fix my car, and then you did all that stuff. And, I have a confession to make." He goes, "All right, what's that?" He goes, "I wasn't a Mason when I did that. I pretended to be. I am one now, though." And the guy shakes his head. He goes, "I know. And I knew then." And he goes, "Why'd you help me?" And he goes, "Well, you weren't a Mason, but I am." And that's kind of where that kind of explains the sort of character. You go a little bit above and beyond. for your brethren, for charity as well. There's a charitable aspect. The Shriners hospitals are Masonic in Philadelphia and Boston, other places. So they bring in about $1 million to $2 million a day for, especially burn patients and kids and stuff like that. So, and they try not to take any money from the families. They will take insurance because, things being what they are these days, but outside of that, they don't make the families go out of pocket for anything. So, which is really cool. There's not a lot of places can kind of say that kind of thing. So, but anyway, there's your primer on masonry. There was another story.
You know what? That's exactly kind of what I was looking for. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy.
I'm sure there are a lot of other people who probably feel very enlightened by that as well. So thanks for the.
I hope so. I mean, there's a lot of nonsense out there about it being Satanistic and all of that stuff, and really, that's just on Sundays, guys. I mean, come on. I'm kidding. That's not on Sundays or any other day. We don't get down with Satan. That's one guy that you can't follow and still be a Mason, at least not openly.
Although I have to say the Satanic Church does a lot of great stuff. They have an incredible sense of humor and it
was meant to be tongue in cheek, right? So
yeah. Oh yeah. They're not out to. They're not out to cause any harm. They're really just meant to show what extremism in religion looks like through parody.
Through parody, right. It's kind of like, and that's another thing. You couldn't join Masonry if you're part of a fake religion that's fake on its face, like the Pastafarianism or something like that. Like the Flying Spaghetti Monster is not an actual god. It's an ironic god, so you can't pray to an ironic god. Even if you're a millennial, I guess. But they do everything ironically, don't they? But of course. No, of course. But yeah, so that's kind of where we land on it. We started there, and we were speaking with a good buddy of ours, Chuck Dunning. I don't know if you saw the last episode or not, or had an opportunity to. He's a contemplative Mason, and he calls himself a Christian esotericist. And I'm like, I'm totally stealing that. I'm a Christian esotericist because I believe in Christianity, but I also believe in other stuff like non-duality and Sufism and a bunch of other stuff. So
at their core, they don't conflict.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but I super excited to have you on the show because, you emphasize a lot of the hero's journey in your work and a lot of that as a framework for personal growth and I'm sure professional growth and everything like that. My buddy Joseph Riggio does a lot of that. He's got a system called mythogenics or mythogenic self, which is again using myths within this sort of larger holistic or healing model to get at certain truths. He has this thing called being transparent to the transcendent, which I thought was kind of a cool way to put that. But how did you come upon that concept? And tell us a little bit about your work, because obviously you've attained persistent non-duality, and that is, I don't even know.
I don't know about that.
Well, all right.
I don't know about that.
Do you think Angelo has?
That term persistent non-duality, I guess I don't know. Here's the thing. I don't know.
Do your thoughts work like thoughts?
Do my thoughts still work like thoughts? Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. They work like thoughts. There's a mind that is a tool that works. I look at it like this way. Just in relation to that question about the mind, that the mind is a tool. And for many of us, and for myself, for most of my life, I thought I was that tool. That I thought the thoughts that were in my mind were mine about me. And they were what defined me. They were what I needed to fix about me. They were what was good about me and what was bad about me. They were me. basically, effectively, there was a me running around like a little homunculus inside my head that was, moving the arms and making the talking and thinking the thoughts. And it just felt like me.
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, that was like having a hammer and banging it against your head all day.
God, tell me about it.
And what I found was that hammer is really good when you turn it around and start hitting nails with it. Now you can build things. You can use it as it was meant to be used. It no longer hurts. It's still there. I still have a hammer in my hand, but it isn't smacking me in the head every day. As a matter of fact, if anything, I would say thoughts are, nano thoughts are like a treat most of the time, because I find I use them creatively. If I'm involved, you can't simply just like plan a business without thinking.
Right.
There's a lot of thinking that needs to go into that. So for things like that, for creating things, for taking an intuition and bringing it into to manifestation, there is a process of using our human faculty of the mind and thoughts and thinking to create those things. So do I feel like those thoughts are mine? We're getting into the paranormal episode. Do I feel like those thoughts are mine? No.
Uh-huh.
Do I feel like they're about anyone? No. Do I spend a lot of time agonizing about them like I used to? No. So I think that would be maybe the best way to explain that. As far as Angelo goes, I don't know. I mean,
it's hard to speak to him except through forums, and I'm like, I am not. He wants you to fill out forms out there to chat with him and about this and that. And I was like, okay, I'm just not down with doing the forums, but no, I'm sure.
He's super busy, and a lot of people, of course, want to talk to him, and he doesn't really do. I mean, because he's a full-time physician.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. He's super, super busy. Anyway, he is one of the most wonderful, kind, realized people I've ever met in my life. And
what does that mean?
Been fortunate enough to has realized his true nature. There is no part of Angelo, in experiencing Angelo, there is no part of Angelo that is inauthentic or in any way it's like being around sitting next to a clear, quiet lake. The lake is still a lake. The lake, you can still go swimming in it. Angelo is just a wonderful person. He's super fun to go to lunch with. He's amazing to spend a week in silent retreat with. He's no different from anyone else I know, other than he is so clear about who and what he is and isn't.
Would you say you're there too?
I wouldn't say that there's any way to really compare that. First of all, I can't know what it's like to be Angelo because I can't be
sure.
Angelo. I can only be me, right? And as far as comparison goes, I can only compare experience and awareness of the present to memories of experience and awareness in the past. So, I
guess my question is, when you get away from this homunculus, right? So he had a homunculus, you had a homunculus, I have a homunculus, Dave has 3 homunculuses. And homunculi. And you somehow put that thing away, or it's destroyed, or something happens to it, and it's never seen again. In that sense, then you embody the larger source. And at least if it's anything like my psychedelic journeys go, then there's no difference between you and the larger the source, right? So in that sense,
that's an interesting way of putting it, and I would agree that is a pretty good way of pointing to it. Yet I would also say to be cautious about equating any psychedelic experience or state with non-duality or awakening. Mm-hmm. Because non-duality isn't a state. So kind of when you say persistent non-duality, that implies like you kind of like fell into this trip and you never came out.
Interesting.
So it's really the I would say, if anything, it's more like the lack of state. That states are seen to clearly be what states are. Mm-hmm. This is a state of consciousness. And then consciousness is seen to be what consciousness is. And I would say where I would have the least clarity still in my own understanding of non-duality is in what is prior to consciousness. Although I have some awareness, understanding, and realization of it, putting it into words is still very difficult for me. And in the majority of my teaching, I really focus on mindfulness and first awakening for folks.
The Kensai or Kensai, I guess.
Kensho.
Yeah,
what Zen calls Kensho, because from there, it all unfolds on its own. There is truly nothing to do. And I was talking to someone about this morning. There's this idea that we have to do to get, right? And that's just very basic, like how we act as humans. Mm-hmm. And any of the doing that happens, I found, is really about just creating a fertile patch of soil. And then you kind of have to hope that a bird flies over, drops a turd in that soil, and there's a seed of awakening that blooms. It's not going to happen if you pave over everything around where you live. It's not going to happen if you never, tend to the soil. But if you have a place for it to grow, awakening can get shit out by a bird, and you wind up with an awakening flower.
Okay, I'm not going to ask you to poop on the show or anything. But delicious.
I'm not a bird.
Yeah, fair enough. But yeah. Well, I've got a bajillion questions, but Dave, you want to jump in with anything that you have that's super on your mind?
Super on my mind. Yeah, sure. Why not?
Oh, well, don't get too excited about it. Go ahead.
I won't get too excited about it.
He's got a lot of talking to do this afternoon when we do the paranormal stuff, so it's going to be mostly him chatting.
That's true. But so, Erik, in your view, how does mindfulness intertwine with spiritual growth? And would you say there's any specific meditative or reflective practices you feel would amplify that connection?
Yeah,
if there is one.
Yeah, it's a great question, Dave. Thanks. Well, one of the other things I sort of, just based on my own experience, my own life, is that I rarely talk about spiritual anything. And what I kind of love about the hero's journey is it's a very secular, it's the oldest secular wisdom we have that points to how to know who we are. The story of the Buddha, the story of Christ, they're all hero's journey stories. Mm-hmm. And for most of my life, I found that spirituality was a stumbling block to realization, because it implied this: there's reality and then there's spirituality. And I know this is not the nature of all spirituality. This was just my own personal experience and kind of why I teach this way. So I think we can only ever share what we authentically know through our own experience and realizations. Yet I have followed a spiritual path for most of my life, and I would still say that yes, I am on a spiritual path, and that spirituality and mindfulness is like gardening for that soil, really. Mindfulness is a way to make sure that when that bird flies over you, there's a crack in the cement, or there's no cement. There's a beautiful, natural plot of soil there. And what mindfulness does is it brings us back to the present moment. And I think the only reason it's even necessary for us, like my dogs, for example, or my cats, do they need mindfulness? No, because they rarely leave the present moment. Dogs have a small capacity to do it, probably because of the amount of time they've spent with us. They can go, oh no, something bad's coming. Or, oh boy, I didn't like that thing last time. But, and they have like a tiny little ego. It's like a little shred of an ego. We have such strong egos that get built up during our childhood and early adulthood that kind of create that whole idea that we are our thoughts. We are our ego. We are this separate suffering self in the world that, needs to do and be to get and have. And a big reason why the hero's journey is so powerful is it provides that final initiation that most of us don't get when we grow up. We're just kind of like, we're raised as children to be adult children, pushed out into a world where the real grown-ups are manipulating a lot of adult children, and we're all wondering why we're so damn unhappy. And the hero's journey says, don't be an adult child. But go, keep going. Or as like Ken Wilber says, was it grow up, wake up, show up? I believe that's the way he puts it. But that growing up mindfulness is kind of, to me, a real key part of that, because it starts to ease our connection to this, what I call our personal myth. It's the story of who and what we are, where we come from, where we're going, but it's all based in the past and the future. And when we awaken that myth, it becomes a story of the present. We are always telling the story of what's here, because we're storytelling beasts. And mindfulness allows us to get closer to the present. So if I want to be telling the story of the present, if I don't want to be locked into this idea, these thoughts, like you were talking about, Alex, when thoughts are self-referential, it's a prison. But thoughts in general, without that self-referencing, are no problem. There's no discomfort to them. And mindfulness allows us to start seeing the difference. Mindfulness allows us to start seeing the gap between reaction and, like cause and effect. So something happens to us, and what feels like a button gets pushed, or, triggered when we're triggered. I like to say that a trigger is of no use if you don't have an explosive
sure, of course,
somehow connected to it. So mindfulness allows us to go looking for those explosives. It allows us to see to break the connection between, the outside, the perception of the outside world and our reactivity. So somebody says something, I feel this way, and I do something, and most of us go, it's just me. It's just how I am. Mindfulness says, is it really? Is that really you? Go look and see and find out for yourself. And I think that is the biggest benefit of mindfulness. And as a mindfulness teacher, it has been a real journey to figure out how to help people start to see that, because it can be so uncomfortable right at the beginning. And I've tried all kinds of different things. I started this. I created an 8-week mindfulness in the here. Sorry, 6 weeks. It's 30. It's 6 weeks. 30 module, extensive course on mindfulness in the hero's journey, and people just had such a hard time getting started with it because there was just it was a hard bar to cross. And in my mind, I thought I'm just going to get it all in there. What I realized recently is that what most people really want, and the best gift we can give them, is to just kindle their curiosity a little bit, just a little bit of mindfulness, a taste. And I've spent the last while building that, and that I've just released that. Well, it's not really released yet, but it's coming soon. Which is just a short 5-day mindfulness course, 8 minutes a day, and where people can just start simply. It doesn't have to be anything that they could even fail at. You can't fail at this one. So I think that mindfulness is important. Yes. It provides the fertile soil for us to know more deeply who we are. And I like to sort of liken it to the compass in life and the hero's journey as a map of the terrain.
Okay.
So I'll ask you this because okay, go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
Go ahead, Alex.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dave.
Go ahead, Dave. I'll kick it off. Trust me.
All right. You mentioned the prison in the mind. Or it could be a prison. So do you feel that with mindfulness, is there a shadow side of it then, if that's the prison in the sense? How could possibly people be led astray by their interpretations of, whatever's coming to them? And is there any kind of individual responsibility there in escaping that prison and healing from that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, as a mindfulness teacher, it's something I think about a lot. I try to teach trauma-informed mindfulness, which means looking out for the signs of people who are having a trauma reaction in their mindfulness practice and working with that. There are some real simple things that we can do to keep those things from being barriers. But a lot of times people need some therapy before mindfulness. If you've got really deep trauma issues, or if mindfulness becomes very triggering, then it's a good idea to go find a therapist and do that work first, and then gently start to introduce the mindfulness, for sure. So yes, mindfulness isn't always helpful for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
That said, for the vast majority of people, it can be very, very helpful. And there's a lot of science to back that up. Sorry about the dog.
No worries.
Nope.
And as far as our shadow goes, eventually mindfulness and the hero's journey reveal shadow material in our lives. They reveal the parts of our personal myth that we have hidden from ourselves, or that we never knew in the first place. And that can be really challenging. But ultimately, that is the dragon of the hero's journey. That is the reason the journey is undertaken. Seeing the fullness of who we are. And in my own experience, that's gone from seeing things that were very scary and upsetting, and shameful, to seeing the fullness of it as just who I am. And again, mindfulness is a non-judgmental awareness of the present moment. So when we approach that shadow material non-judgmentally, it's like you can throw an arm around your anxiety and your shame and, light a cigar and talk. It becomes a way to just say, all right, you're all welcome here. This is no part of me is excluded. And that, in my experience, has been the healing of shadow work. Not like, oh, I don't have that anymore, or I don't think that. It's a sense of like, yeah, that's there and it's totally fine. It's not hurting anyone or anything. It just is. It's like, yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I'll piggyback on that. I come from a Orthodox Christian background, Romanian Orthodox to be precise. Very dogmatic in many ways. They actually had a couple of priests on a podcast that said that the downsides of mindfulness, and that was that they refer to the part in the Bible where it says, well, if you clean the house out, you have one demon in the house, so to speak, and you clean the house out. Now that demon returns and it brings back a bunch of its other friends because now there's no clutter in the house anymore, right? You've gotten rid of your thoughts and now it can sort of much more easily dominate you than it could before because there's no place to hide anymore because the house is in essence nicely swept.
Okay.
Obviously that's an older understanding. I think that they probably, I think my opinion is I think they're talking about PTSD and they're talking about trauma responses for the most part there. I don't know if you believe in demons or if that's like a real
belief is really what that comes down to.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Belief. What is belief, right? And when you have a religion, it relies on belief.
Sure.
There are certain beliefs that you have to be in that religion. Mindfulness doesn't ask you to let go of your beliefs. It just asks you to be aware of them. What do I believe? Awakening is where now, if you want to take your beliefs to your awakening, you can do that. That's where beliefs really become that kind of shadow stuff. And Angela talks about this a lot, if you kind of want to like take a peek at who you really are mm-hmm. and then shut the door real quick, it's almost like an extra layer of suffering that you get from that. So maybe that's what they're talking about, that there's
could be.
But I don't know. That hasn't been my own experience that mindfulness is allows more demons in. It really, if anything, it's just going to show you the ones that are there. And that's not even for everyone, it's really just like, do you want this? Do you want to just have your demons? Do you want to have your beliefs? Do you want to just think that you can get enough stuff and, like reach all your goals in life to find perfect, lasting happiness that's just going to never end? Go for it. But if that's been like, for me, I tried that, I thought this is the way to do it. There's, I was an atheist for many years. I was an atheist hedonist, basically. Like I'm going to I'm going to create so much happiness and fun and awesomeness in my life that it's gonna knuckle under, and it's gonna say, all right, you win. And it didn't work. It didn't work. And that's what really drove me to my big spiritual crisis. I was in my late 40s. I had accomplished all my goals. I had no more goals left.
Okay.
I was still staring at all my demons, and I had no idea how to fix this.
So what happened?
What happened was mindfulness. Finally, kind of what happened was I started thinking about, okay, I had been a hedonist for so long, and I've always, done things for others.
What does hedonist mean in this case? Like you just went to orgies every day?
No. I mean, pleasure. Like pleasure is let's prioritize pleasure.
Okay,
is basically how I would say. So no one specific kind of pleasure. Yeah, I also, there were times in my life where my motto was too much is never enough. But as I got older, I prioritized moderation as well. So I'm talking about like a 20-year journey of looking to pleasure as a guidepost, and at the same time doing things for others as well, because that was pleasurable for me. But when I started Listen to Sleep, and kind of everything that led up to that, I found something clicked deeper inside of me. I was like, oh, this is a combination of something that's pleasant to me. I love reading these stories and creating stuff. I started my first podcast in like 2007 when you had to tell people what a podcast was.
Right.
It's like a radio show, but you listen on your iPod. And so this was like, I don't know, my fourth or fifth podcast. And it just stuck. People were really grateful and sleeping, like they were sleeping. And I thought, boy, there's really no greater gift you can give to people who are awake all night going, well. And then I thought, well, there is one greater gift. You could help them, to ease their anxiety with mindfulness. And I knew I needed that for myself too, because I had never been able to have a consistent mindfulness practice. So I kind of took a step totally away from hedonism and towards something I didn't want to do, but I had an intuition would be helpful and would be good for me and good for others. And I became a mindfulness teacher. I took a year and a half to go through a certification program for that. And that was what really got me to come up against all my own resistance to mindfulness. And I learned so much about myself. And I did that because I wanted to create meditations for the podcast.
Sure. That makes a ton of sense. But Erik, as well as I do, and I at least, in my perspective, let's say, I shouldn't put that on you, but hedonism is addictive. It's an addiction as much as a lot of other things. So how do you
it can be
walk away from an addiction, right? Whether it's porn or whether it's drugs or whether it's, a lot of this stuff.
Addiction is really rooted in resistance and in the past and the future.
Yes.
So in the present moment, addiction has the least hold it has. And I'm not an addiction expert. I know that, there are different kinds of addiction. There are different kinds of addicts. There are different ways people suffer from addiction. I agree with you that that the life I was living had an addictive aspect to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I would also say that the whole idea of living as a mind-identified self is a little bit like living like an addict. You're looking for fixes from the world. If this happens, then I'm happy. When that happens, I hate it.
It's all the outer fixes. Yeah,
sad.
Sure.
Yeah, it's about that, right? So it was really about vigorously turning that atheistic lens around and going, what is this? What is sitting here? That started with mindfulness, and then I met Angela. And
Now, why do you say
not
atheistic?
long after that, because I was an atheist for many years.
Right, but what?
I didn't have a higher power to ask for help.
Oh, I see what you mean. I see what you mean. Got it.
So I just sat here with me. And that was humbling and agonizing and all the things you might expect it would be.
Mm-hmm.
But it was also very revealing. And it also allowed me to see the fullness of humanity. You know, my biggest problem with spirituality was this whole idea of that there was some part of me that was missing, like the spiritual part.
Mm-hmm.
How do I get that spiritual part? Like, is a guru going to give it to me? Is he going to touch me on the forehead? And there's going to be Shakti and that I'm awake. And oh my God.
Nisargadatta said that, right? So,
Yeah, exactly. So, but it had never happened for me. You know, you're talking to somebody who was a Rajneeshi back in the 80s. You know, I mean, I had gone through the guru thing. You know, I had been through that. But it didn't work for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I also started to think that this isn't my path. I didn't know what my path was, but I could start to feel that wasn't it. The way I was going wasn't it. So mindfulness opened up that questioning space, which is why I teach mindfulness the way I do. 3 basic principles: gentleness, curiosity, and self-compassion. That's all you need for mindfulness. You don't need any of the other practices. As a matter of fact, I found that most of them don't work very well without those 3 things. And so that's how I got to mindfulness.
Can I ask you a question? And I don't know how to ask this without necessarily maybe being triggering. So I don't know if that will, because I know your background. And you've been pretty upfront about your sexuality, and can we talk about that?
Gay as a Christmas party. Absolutely. Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack in that statement. Okay, fair enough. But so with that, obviously, as we look at yin yang and the idea of what is yin, what is yang, what is traditionally yin, and what is traditionally yang in terms of masculinity, femininity, everything that goes with that. You know, it's not surprising to have somebody like Brené Brown talk about vulnerability, right? For instance, so she's a big one in talking about vulnerability. One of the things that we try to focus on this show more recently is, what does it mean to be a man today? Because obviously we both come from a fraternal background. So, you know, we have a lot of opportunity and I don't want to say expertise necessarily, but a certain amount of grounding and training and dealing with men, helping them to become better men through certain modalities. You are walking that path as well. In talking about gentleness, talking about vulnerability, those are not quote unquote manly qualities in the traditional sense. Although I think we'll find as we look back on history and what was done, there was a lot of gentleness, and that was never an unmanly quality, let's call it.
Alex, you're a Christian.
Right, exactly.
Your dude was so gentle.
It's all about forgiveness, all about love, all about, right, exactly.
So gentle.
So you know, that's a lovely thing to talk about and to be a part of, and you know, something that I think men need to hear more about, and they need to understand how they can still be men, still feel like they're men, and exhibit more of this type of thing.
Yeah.
and I don't know if you want to speak about that. It just reminds me of Lord of the Rings, and I don't say that just because of your beard looking like Gandalf, but Ian McKellen, he happens to be gay, and there was a scene there between Frodo and Sam, in when Frodo wakes up and Sam's in the bed and he's sort of holding his hand, and he's saying, well, I wanted to put that in because I happen, he said I happen to be gay, and because of that, I wanted to see that tenderness between two men, and that's an okay thing. And I said, that's not really a gay thing. That's a human thing. I mean, that's not like,
Right.
the tenderness between people. It doesn't have to be relegated to, well, this is my sexuality, and as such, blah, blah, blah. Right. So it could be something that's available to everyone, and should be, I think.
It's a very cultural thing for us. You can go to a lot of Central and South American cultures and find men who are just kind of like all over each other, straight guys. There's nothing sexual about it. Right. They sit with their arms around each other. They hug, not like a side hug or whatever those bro hugs are. Those are always confusing. And I'm like, oh, we're doing that one. Okay. I don't touch it. It's Carl Jung talks about this a lot.
Okay.
And he shed a lot of light on the hero's journey for me, his work. And we all have an animus and an enema. And in men, our enema is a lot stronger. And that's our female energy. And it is the resistance to that female energy that becomes, I found that in almost every part of life where we're going, what is this? Wait, this feels uncomfortable. This feels weird. This isn't right. There's some resistance to our nature, to who we are. And this also kind of factors into that whole, the grow up, wake up, show up thing of that. To fully mature as a man is to see the fullness of what the emotional experiences of men are.
Mm-hmm.
And there are just a lot of people who are very immature emotionally. And a lot of them have very loud platforms. Some of them are presidents of countries. And we're still, we're raised in these societies where as kids, we all heard that kind of stuff. And then as adults, we still hear it and we think, well, why am I the freak? I'm just not going to say anything. And it comes back to identity too. This whole idea of who am I? Well, and this is something growing up gay. I mean, I look at it like it was a real gift in seeing through identity, because I went through so many identities as a kid because I knew my authentic identity was just going to get me killed. And I needed to be somebody else.
Killed.
So I was like, if I need to be I started getting beaten up by kids younger than me when I was in 7th grade, and sure, back in the 80s, there was gay people still get killed, but it felt like it was a life or death thing. And I knew I couldn't, and just never, not to mention just the shame of like actually saying the words. Like in Rhode Island in the 80s, when I was in high school, there was one kid who was out, one high school kid who was out. He was on the news and the entire state was talking about him like, who is that freak? So, I actually would love to meet that guy today because, through balls of steel. He was doing something back when, I didn't come out till 1988. And I was in college, like 22 years old, before I finally realized, okay, we're gonna dive into this and see what this is all about. But it's a combination of all those things, and getting back to identity, this whole like the mask that we wear. It feels, if you've only ever had one sense of identity, it feels like it's really real because it's the only one you've ever had. I was lucky. I had many, like I was a little pretentious gay kid who was getting beaten up. And then I was like one of the coolest kids in high school who was hanging around with all the, the right people. And was I any more happy? No. But, I was just being a completely different person because, well, why not? This is better than that. And I think most of us do that. We grab an identity. And I'm sure it's probably one of the things that can trip people up in a fraternity is you start to see, okay, I'm supposed to have a certain identity here, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it can be challenging for people especially when you're in a group, to kind of say, like, who am I, right? And what I love about the work you guys are doing is you definitely don't go that way. Like we're all trying to be the same. You're like, who are you? You're supporting people for who they are.
We try. We definitely do. Because obviously we've all gone. I don't know if you had any instinct of Dave's background, but his last name is Ferrigno and his uncle is Lou Ferrigno, who is talk about a paragon of manly muscles and everything else that sort of goes with it. And Dave's gene pool is not too far from there. He's in the gym about 10 times a day. And all of that kind of stuff. I thought about going to the gym, but I laid down until I got over it. Yeah, and it's just one of those kinds of things where as you get older, you start to question a lot, and especially this day and age about what does it mean to be a man. There's this whole trans movement going on right now, and all of this other stuff. I don't know how you feel about it. I've heard some of your thoughts about it in other talks with Angelo and so on. Part of it, and we don't want to get too political necessarily. It's not really the show, but
I don't think trans people are political. I think trans people are politicized.
Okay, that's
in no way a political movement.
Mm-hmm.
There are, look at Caitlyn Jenner, Republican trans woman. So you can be on both sides of the political spectrum and be trans. Trans is
but she gets Uncle Tom'd, right? For not being on the right side of things. So,
that's a political thing.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
And she gets flack for being trans and for her politics too. Absolutely.
Right.
But what trans is a gender identity.
Mm-hmm.
It's saying this is my gender. And that's like all identity. We are all free to choose our identity in this world or to choose not to have one if we want to. And so to the extent that that's politicized, to me, it's just that the trans folk are in the same position I was in the 70s and early 80s as a gay person. They're, getting the brunt of society's dislike and judgment for a minority. Back then it was queer folks, gay, lesbian, whatever. Now people are much more about like, oh yeah, we all know a gay guy and he's great and he does my hair and he's totally fine. He's married. They got kids. They're good people. They go to church. And so there's kind of like society doesn't have the gay boogeyman like it used to. And trans folk have sort of fallen into that role. And I think they need protecting the way, there were people who were protecting us back then. And so I include them under the LGBTQIA plus umbrella. And I feel like, especially given the current political situation, that they deserve and need support and recognition, and to be treated as humans equally.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. There are And I mean, I know in my estimation, I know a fair amount of gay guys who don't consider them part of the LGBTQIA community as such. Is sort of even that is a sort of a mythology that gets put on that maybe they are, maybe they're not, based on mutually shared experience and so on.
They are the T. They are literally part of the LGBT.
Well, no. I get that.
They're part of like when it used to just be 3 letters.
Right. Exactly. So,
they're own timers in the LGBT community.
Yeah, no, it's that's funny. Very cool. That's very interesting because, now you've got a lot of, well, let me ask you this though, from a sexuality perspective, how much of that, and I'm talking when you regard mindfulness and the idea of Kensho, right?
But
so one of the
trans also isn't sexuality. Trans isn't sexuality.
Well,
you can be trans and then be effectively
asexual, or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Or you can, if you are a man and you're dating a woman, you're not gay anymore, are you? So I mean, what if a man and a woman are together? Are they gay? Is that
so? It's funny.
I would say it's queer, but it's not about sexuality anymore. It's really about gender and about identity expression.
So when I was in law school, we had there was a girl I went to law school with. Well, I say girl because we're all pretty young. We went through law school, and she transitioned to a man at that time. And I actually asked her that question. It was kind of tongue in cheek, and she told me to go screw myself. But it was. But we were friends. And she said, because she was dating a girl. I said, well, okay. I say he was dating a girl. So so now you're not a lesbian anymore because you're a dude dating a girl, right? So and so it's very interesting that way. It's very, I will say, confusing to some extent. But
it's confusing because it's new.
Right.
It's confusing. And it's like the way people get all tripped up on they, them pronouns. I do a lot of bedtime stories that have non-binary characters in them. And I'll do the whole story with they, them pronouns, talking about that person. And some people will write the most scathing. You can go on that Apple podcast right now and say, I think the most recent review is about one. That's so stupid. Why do you do that? I was born perfectly happy with my gender identity. And this isn't about you.
Right. It's about the other two. Right.
Just educate yourself. It's just what other people prefer. And I feel like if it's the least, it literally is the least courtesy we can extend to someone to just refer to them in the gender that they prefer.
Yeah.
I don't use a name I made up for someone. I use their name. So.
Right. So that identity as regards Kensho, though, how do you keep that type of idea from then becoming a new ego position, right? Which would then take you further away from mindfulness and Kensho and getting into.
Yeah, no, I get your point. It's a great question. It also, it gets to the heart of what identity is.
Right.
In a sense, Kensho, awakening, whatever you want to call it, is a complete, like I was talking about with the shadow, it's a complete embracing of identity. And this was something I actually asked Angelo the first time I interviewed him before I had my own first awakening. It's like, but like when I say Angelo, I mean you, and you then talk back to me, but then you say there's, you don't have an identity. What does that mean?
Right.
I was like super confused by it. And it's not about the identity. Just like when Buddha said desire is the root of all suffering, that's not actually what he said. Attachment to desire is at the root of all suffering. Right. And attachment to identity is the thing. Thinking that you are your identity, that they are the same thing. And so a trans person, a gay person, a straight person, it doesn't matter what your identity is. In a sense, Awakening involves the embracing it so tightly that it is effectively gone.
Mhm.
There's such a deep acceptance of what it is, and so it doesn't matter what that identity is. And along the way, if part of your exploration of your identity is saying, I am trans, this is something I have hid from people I know what that feels like. I hid my sexuality from people for many and many years.
Wow.
And you come out and you say, I am this. You know, you want to see a great movie on screen, watch Will and Harper on Netflix. It's fantastic.
What's it called?
Will and Harper.
Will and Harper.
Will, what's his name? The guy from Elf.
Will Ferrell.
And his best friend Harper,
Okay.
who's trans. They go on a road trip, and you'll get a great sense of it'll answer a lot of your questions, and it will let you get to know a trans person.